Howdy, boys and girls. I got these crooked glasses. They're just reading glasses. I don't normally wear glasses when I'm out and about, but I've gotten to the point to where I can't read without them. And these ones are crooked. So, just letting you know. I don't need nobody in the comment section saying, "Hey, yo, fix your glasses, man." No, they don't get any better than this. This is where it's at. All right. So today I'm gonna go through Brave New World, just as promised. It starts out at the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center of the World State in London. Already I'm a prime candidate to earn that nifty little information bauble at the bottom of the screen where it like tells you that I'm gonna give you misinformation, which basically just means I'm gonna tell you the truth that they don't want you to hear. So be it. It's all good. I mean, I don't care. I didn't put it there. So our world state motto is diversity, equity, sustainability, and inclusion, right? Sound familiar? Well, that's not what's in the book here. That's not in Brave New World. That's in our world. That's how we're even more messed up than they are. And it's so Orwellian, right? Diversity. That just means inclusion. Really, just means exclusion. Sustainability. Totally unsustainable for the economy, and probably barely. Well, I'm not going to get myself kicked off of here. So, yeah, all the Orwellian nonsense that we are bombarded with on a day-to-day basis. And I'm here to offer somewhat of an alternative to that, so that you don't have to listen to that nonsense. You can listen to my nonsense, right? So, no, in the book it's community, identity, and stability. But doesn't it sound similar? Not even as bad as what we have, but whatever. Same thing, right? Of course, everyone wears overalls in this book because that is the dystopian uniform of totalitarian states in our semi-fictional universe. Okay, I've got a frog in my throat, and so I don't know what's going to come of this. I might be hacking over here. Now I got the hiccups too. So I got hiccups and I got a frog in my throat. So I'm always afflicted with something. So everybody wears the overalls. Like in 1984. Or they wear like coveralls or something. It's the uniform of the future. Well, at least the workers in the laboratory setting, they've got the overalls in this book. Not everybody wears overalls, but these the workers in the lab. It's kind of like the Willy Wonka's chocolate factory of test tube babies. What we've got going on at the beginning of Brave New World, because it starts out at this Central London hatchery, right? And so the director of hatcheries and conditioning, or the DHC, is giving a tour of the plant. And who's he giving the tour to? Their students. So probably like a school or something, one of their indoctrination programs. And so he's giving them a tour of the plant, and he takes them into the fertilizing room. So each member of society is kept happy and knowing only as much as what is sort of appropriate and what the government sort of wants them to know. What is needed in order to permit them to do their jobs. So that's really the crux of it. They don't want people independently educated. They want people to be able to function as a cog in the wheel. And it's really not that much different from what we've got in our society, in our university system, where they take you, up from, high school, junior college, into the highest levels, and they're just getting you to specialize more and more, and until to the point to where you're useless anywhere else. I mean, you've got like this basic, arithmetical like foundation, but beyond that, you almost kind of forget all that stuff once you get into your area of specialization, and they make you feel special in your area of specialization. Then you no longer have this broad scope. You're whittled down to this cog in the machine, and so that's kind of where they keep everybody in Brave New World. And as we'll come to see, people are sort of bred to do certain jobs, and there is a genetic caste system, and so eugenics are used to precision in this book. And as we will come to find out in our world, eugenics is still being implemented, but it's been rebranded. They're remarketing eugenics so that it doesn't sound like Tiny Mustache Man from Germany kind of programs. But we will see that these programs do exist in our culture, in Western culture, and they take different forms, and they make it sound all fancy and scientific when they take us into the areas of gene editing and whatever color eyes you want your kids to have, right? Well, all those genetic modifications can come down to skin color, eye color, hair color, height, dispositions towards certain physical statures. Each member of society is kept happy, knowing only as much as what was needed and permitted in order to do their jobs. So I already said that. I'm reading off my notes in case you didn't notice. The object was minute specialization and only the necessary generalities. So just like we said, they are not being taught philosophy or critical thinking. And you'll notice that even today, our university systems are dispensing with that stuff. It's a common meme on the internet, and you'll see it a lot. Like, I'm sure glad I took that philosophy class, because like that Descartes really sure is coming in handy for earning my monthly paycheck, as if that was the end goal, was to scrape by on a monthly pittance just so that you don't shit the bed, like barely make it, like you're eating top ramen for those 4 days up before your next paycheck. Because even when you make more, you just spend more, right? And so I'm finding ways around that. And we'll get into the crypto stuff later, because there's all kinds of exciting stuff happening right now in the world of crypto. But I have to be careful, because I don't want to come off like I'm giving anybody, that's another meme in crypto land, is the not financial advice. Of course not. I would never do that. You wouldn't want to follow in the financial trajectory that I've taken over the years. But I'm crafting a new path, and my new path is looking pretty optimistic. And I've saved more in the last year than I've ever actually put away, and been able to scrimp by putting a certain amount into investments, which typically most people don't get to invest. There's a barrier of entry. You need a minimum amount to be able to get with a financial advisor who's going to give you his time, and you can't come to these guys with like $300 and go, hey man, how do I get in? So you can do that with crypto, and you do it all on your own. And the whole idea of a financial advisor is this, dependent relationship anyway. And even when I had financial advisors in the past, when I had money, I never paid attention to what they were investing in. And so when you get into crypto, you're doing all the investing, and you're very involved. And in it, not only that, it's kind of fun. It's almost there's a little bit of entertainment value to it, and so you become highly interested in what you're actually putting your money into. When it comes to yielding, and when you learn how to stake coins, and you're actually passively earning income, and you're earning it while you sleep, and it's kind of exciting at first, and you check it every 10 minutes, and you're like, ooh, I made like, a hundredth of a penny just now. But those hundredth of a pennies add up, and then sometimes when your stakes come out, you need to restake, you throw a little bit more money in there, and with any luck, you'll gain a significant amount of coins, and then the value goes up, and so it's just amplified. So I mean, we're at a good time in history that kind of thing is even available to the lay person, which nothing like that ever has been in the past. And it's not subjected to the tyrannical whims of the Federal Reserve like what we normally have, with inflation of our currency and debasement of its value. And so yeah, I didn't mean to go off on the whole crypto thing, but I sort of have been thinking about talking about it. But so Brave New World. So where are we? So they don't teach him philosophy or critical thinking. And that was another thing. So I'm going to go off on this other little side tangent just for a second. Is that when I was at community college and I was taking classes that were supposed to be critical thinking classes, like I took statistics for the behavioral sciences because I was a psychology major. And then I went, in the follow-up class to that was research methods. And research methods is a discipline that's supposed to be all about critical thinking, but our professor, who was a political activist, basically we never referred to the book. She just told us what she thinks, and we got tested on that. And she would contradict the teachings from the book. So the book would teach us about biases and how to circumvent our biases, and the whole time she's just like, well, we all know that, Trump, da 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 da. She would say things like, well, if you were one of those people that voted for Trump, it's neither here nor there, but actually it is both here and there. I think with these glasses, I probably did a pretty good impression of her. But I think these glasses did at one time belong to a social justice warrior. But anyway, so that class, it was supposed to be the critical thinking class. It was the highest class of my major. So like when you're at that level of getting an associate degree, the highest class you can take at community college is research methods and psychology. And then of course they make you take it again at the university. And then you have another social justice warrior teaching it to you there. But that was the highest quote unquote class, of my program. And I had this political activist who would just vent her ideology on the class. And it's funny, I would tell some of my friends about it who are also political activists, and they'd be like, oh, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. No, it's not the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so back to Brave New World. And we're at chapter 1. We're kind of going back to the beginning. I think that when I gave my previous lecture on Brave New World, it was just the foreword. It was Huxley's foreword. So we're in this place, this London hatchery, and it's basically where they have test tube babies, and they grow the babies outside of the womb, and that's the whole point, is that they are not, it's not like a society where women get married, men and women marry each other and decide to have a baby, and they plan it, and the mother gets pregnant, and the father runs out at 3 o'clock in the morning to get super nachos from the 7-Eleven just to keep her happy. It is more like a factory where they've got some, some sperm reserve, and then they sort of create like a synthetic womb that's like they've got like this. They even use animal products, and they've got this sort of substrate where they fertilize the eggs, so they extract the eggs, so they actually have human eggs, and then they fertilize them on like a sort of. It's kind of like when you're doing like hydroponics or something, and you've got this emulsion that you sort of try to grow the clones in. Well, it's kind of the same. I can't believe I actually know that. So it's kind of the same sort of thing, and there's a sort of like a tissue, an animal tissue substrate that they use, on which they fertilize the eggs, and it's just this process. It's an industrial process of making babies, and that way nobody has a family. Everybody grows up a ward of the state, and they are indoctrinated and inculcated with the values of whatever the prevailing narrative is that comes from on high, right? So age was not a considerable parameter in everyday life, and that is because, well, there's children, and the children are reared by the state nannies, but once you're an adult, they've sort of got the technology to sort of keep you young and fit, and no, there's really no overweight people, and you live a long life, and once you're pretty much ready to expire, you're sort of put into like a hospice type of place, and nobody ever sees you again. And so age wasn't really like, I mean, there was definitely older people, but people kind of kept their youth a little bit more, and there was a lot of activity. Leisure activities were usually, there's a lot of like racquetball type of stuff, and all the sports type pastimes usually involve a lot of technology and implements that kind of help the economy along the way. It's sort of a consumer society, but instead of it being like suburbs where people have a garage full of shit, basically, like people don't have all this stuff. It's almost like you're sort of in like a coon pod. You've got like a cubicle kind of apartment that you live in, but you go and you play like racquetball, but it's like this racquetball that's like deluxe racquetball that's got all this equipment, and you rent it, sort of. So there is a consumer element to the society, but it's not really ownership. It's more like, it's just like expensive outings, and you go to the, instead of going to the movies, you go to the feelies, and what the feelies are is, it's there's a drug induced aspect to it, and you go there and you just get to see movies not too much different than what you get on Netflix now, where it just turns into sensational rubbish. There's really not much of a storyline. It's kind of like the soft porn sort of adventure, but not with any real substance to it. You're not watching movies that make you think. You're watching movies that get you to feel a certain way. And it's like my son the other day was watching The Croods, and like I found myself like almost crying, like after like 5 minutes of watching it, because there's these deeply emotional these tearjerker parts that come out. Like the music plays, and it shows like the girl's face, and she's like supplicating toward like her dad, who she's estranged from because he never said he loved her, and it's just like, oh, and it makes you cry, and it kind of does, and so I couldn't even hold a conversation with my son while this movie was playing, because I didn't want him to know I was crying. So, for the sake of the reading audience, the director explains to the students the basics of how the babies are incubated. I always get a chuckle when they work the backdrop of the story into the dialogue. So like, whenever there's something like to where the author doesn't want to speak directly to the reader, he sort of incorporates the explanation into the dialogue, and it sounds kind of cheesy and almost like, why are these people having this conversation? Like, why is this person having to tell the other person how the world works? Like, they both live in the same world. Like, they should know in most cases. But in this case, what you've got is this director who's taking these students, through the factory, and he's explaining it to students, and so it's a good foil. Okay, so he shows them the incubators and the racks of test tubes and describes the fertilizing process and the egg extraction. As a side note, okay, I'm going to read this and then explain it because I don't want it to sound contrived here. Okay, I remember when I was in my early 20s, so my girlfriend was donating. Oh, okay, yeah. When I was in my early 20s, I had this girlfriend, and her friends were, what they were kind of doing to supplement their income is they were donating their eggs. This was a thing in like the mid 90s that a lot of girls were doing. And so my girlfriend and her best friend had decided to donate their eggs, and so it's like a procedure, and they have them extracted and then they donate them to would-be mothers. And they give them a couple $1,000 for it. It's pretty decent bread, I guess, if you don't need the eggs. I mean, I guess they produce a certain amount of eggs, and if they've already had enough kids or they figure they might not have very many, they can donate their eggs and get a pretty good, cash reward for that. And so my girlfriend did it, and then her friend did it, and then their other friend did it, and it kind of became a thing. Like a lot of us band guys in the music scene, like our girlfriends were out donating their eggs for cash. And so my friend Joey, he's a character, this Joey guy, and so he's like, hey dude, I'm thinking about donating my eggs, dude. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you can get pretty good money for donating eggs, man. I think I'm gonna donate my eggs. I was like, Joey, you don't have any eggs. He's like, I don't? I'm like, no, you're a dude, man. You don't have eggs. He's like, shit, man. He's like, I wonder if I could donate some sperm. I said, yeah, but you're not going to get very much. You're only going to get you're going to get like the McDonald's breakfast and, like a Spank Mag. They'll give you a couple of cookies and a Hustler. You're not going to get the $1,000 for that. So just forget about it. But I thought that was pretty funny. I had that in my notes here. So once the ova were checked for abnormalities on a microscope slide, they'd transfer it to a porous receptacle, which was immersed into the fertilizing agent, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now it kind of goes into a little bit of like the caste system. So the alpha and beta classes were fertilized normally, but the 3 lower classes underwent what was called the Bokanovsky process. Okay, so they're deliberately manipulating the zygote so that it doesn't, it actually hinders the development so that it won't grow normally, because they need to build lower classes in society. So the alpha and beta classes were fertilized normally, but the 3 lower classes underwent the Bokanovsky process, whereby litters of clones were produced from a single batch, like twins, but like 100 of them. So you got like 100 identical twins. And the only thing that really keeps that from happening in humans is the fact that a woman can only carry, like 2, maybe 3. But in this situation where they use the substrate, they can make as many as they want. And so there's like 100 twins that they create. And so, like I was saying, it's like a eugenic process. They want the kids to look a certain way. They do the gene editing, and then they make 100 of these kids. It's just like cultivating marijuana. Like they want the super skunk or the sour diesel coming out this year, and they're going to breed it a certain way. They do the same thing with dogs, and so like they find, this is more akin to the marijuana cultivation, where they find the exact strain that they want, and then they create a shitload of clones, and they can make as much of it as they want, and sell it at the Cannabis Cup or take it to Amsterdam or whatever. And the process itself causes a series of developmental arrests, creating a controlled batch of inferior embryos. So a genetic hierarchy is created, thus a societal caste system, tightly controlled and employed according to purpose. The lower castes get to work in the factories. 96 identical twins working 96 identical machines. The alphas, which are the top tier, these are the best embryos, were directors and managers. So this was an instrument of social stability. The principles of mass production applied to biology with the purpose of stabilizing the population. The pod snaps technique was used to accelerate the process of maturing the eggs. So essentially you could get nearly 1,100 brothers and sisters in 150 batches of identical twins, all within 2 years of the same age. So you get just with two parents, basically, you get all these offspring. I've heard some people speculate, I typed this wrong, but yeah, I've heard some people speculate that there's no black people in Brave New World. They're like, oh, it's a racist book. There's no black people. It's like a book about the future, and they don't have black people. Well, that is not true, actually. Like in this first chapter, a young lab technician quotes some statistics here, and it's here on our world. It's not like some other planet. The statistics on world records, all right, for reproduction in tropical locations, and said that the black person's ovary responds exceptionally well to the pituitary extract, producing larger batches of embryos, okay, with the kind of African population, or the tropical population, as it says here. In the bottling room, even animal tissues were used to line the bottles in which the embryos were incubated. All the details, including the child's name, are labeled on the bottles. Here you can see that this scene just sort of looks like Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, with these sort of Oompa Loompas scuttling around and bottles bubbling everywhere. In the social predestination room, they order the required amounts of each strata of individuals. So, okay, well, we need this many alphas, we need this many epsilons, and it's very regimented, it's very controlled. Surpluses are disposed of. So if these things die, it's no big deal. It's not considered a loss. Well, that's kind of what they're doing right now, right? I mean, like a baby that hasn't emerged into the, into breathing regular air is not a baby, right? That's what they say anyway. Like, it's not a baby until it comes out. So when it's inside and it's tucked in there, all cramped and claustrophobic, it's not a baby. It looks like a baby. It's shaped like a baby. But it's not a baby until it actually comes out, or until the mother decides that she wants it. So in the social predestination room, they order the required amounts of each strata of individuals. Surpluses are disposed of. There is no grief over the loss of product at this stage. They are considered no more valuable than cupcakes that are dropped on the bakery floor. So he then leads them into the embryo store. Still on our tour of the test tube baby plant. So he leads them to the embryo store. Here it is dark, except for the red light, like a photographer's studio. And the bottles containing the embryos are shelved and moved onto conveyor belts, where they slowly move up at timed increments over the rest of their gestational period, periodically treated with different hormones and extract on a bed of animal biotissue until they are brought up into the daylight in the decanting room, an endless process of pickle punks. So I don't know if you know what a pickle punk is, but a pickle punk is, have you ever seen one of those like novelty, like the jar with the baby in it? Like it's like a fetus that's in a jar and it's all scrunched up and like looks like Stephen Hawking in there, like it's got like a little bit of hair and like its face is all, and it's just a little pickle punk in a jar. So that's what that is. So he even gave the guests a taste of the blood surrogate on which the embryos fed. I remember when I was working at a nightclub and I was running the kitchen, and there was a salesman who came in and he had this degreaser that he was selling, and he's like, "Look, this stuff's so safe," and he like took the bottle and just drank some of it, like it was Kool-Aid, like he was drinking, like he just pulled some Tampico out of the fridge. I was like, dude, you don't have to do that, man. I would have bought it. You didn't have to drink it. Like, go home and shit yourself. So along the way, the embryos are tested for sex. So yeah, it is kind of like cultivating wheat, because you have to sex the buds, right? And like when you sex the plants, when they start showing signs of whether they're male or female, you have to separate them. You gotta keep them separated. So the embryos are tested for sex and labeled accordingly. Controls are made for... Man, I swear I got so many typos in here. I can't believe I did this. Controls are made chemically for fertility. The free martins being precluded via male hormone treatments, whereby occasionally a woman might mature to grow a beard, but in all cases are sterile. Okay, so what's going on here with these free martins? What is a free martin? Controls are made chemically for fertility. So some of these individuals that they're creating are made sterile on purpose, and they're called free martins, and there's a free martin class. For the free martins are precluded for fertility, is what that means. They're precluded from fertility via male hormone treatments, whereby occasionally a woman might mature to grow a beard. So they're given these male hormone treatments to keep them sterile, and some of these women end up growing beards. So I don't know how exactly that fits in. I don't recall at any point in the story them having female characters with beards, but maybe they're just kind of kept in the dark a little bit. Yeah, I even say that here. I can't remember whether further mention is made of the free martins later in the book or any women with beards. So, I live in California, and I'm already getting stiff here. So I live in California, and we had a band here called the Free Martins. They were a punk rock band, and they used to play at the club downtown that I used to play at. Shout out to them, right? The Free Martins. Okay, so straight out of the can, the babies are predetermined for their social caste, whether they be alphas, betas, deltas, gammas, or epsilons. Those are the tiers. The alphas were the controllers and the directors. The beta minuses were the mechanics. The lower castes were sewage workers, porters, etc. They would impose oxygen shortages on embryos to stunt their growth. Epsilons didn't require intelligence, so they literally engineered morons for specific tasks. Through advances in technology, the arms race among nations was to figure out how to grow the individuals faster, as, say, how animals can be mature adults at a younger age than humans. Like a 1-year-old cow is more of an adult cow than like a 1-year-old human. 1-year-old human's still a baby. But like a 1-year-old pit bull is almost fully grown. It's like a teenager at that point. And so that's this aforementioned arms race, is to try to grow these humans faster. Um, a competing lab in another country had produced individuals who were sexually mature at 4 and full grown at 6.5 years. And yeah, this made me think of the movie Morgan with Anya Taylor-Joy. It is, I don't know if it was by Ridley Scott, if he wrote it or if his son directed it. But there's this genetically modified girl, and she's designed to be a deep state weapon. And she was full grown, or at least teenage in appearance, by the age of 5. But was still emotionally a little girl when she became distressed. When she fell under stress, she kind of reverted to like she had childish like outbursts. Her emotional capacity, I believe, was added as a part of her prototype because they had developed certain iterations of this weapon, this this genetic soldier that they were developing. And so they decided to add an emotional capacity to this iteration to see how it would work. And it sort of backfired because she was unpredictably like killing and maiming. Like she would have these emotional outbursts and sort of like freak out, and like she stabbed this woman in the eye who was like her caretaker that she cared about. And then she killed a deer on an outing where they took her out into the woods, to this sort of placid lake, and she really loved it out there. And she killed this deer out there and just later felt terrible about it. And so they had decided at some point that they needed to retire her because she was a failure in the experiment. And so they brought in this other, a previous instantiation of this, of this genetically modified being. And that was sort of I don't want to say the main character of the story, because I think Morgan was the main character. But there was this woman who was sent to the labs, and she was sent with the express purpose of retiring this, this human experiment. And so they, you basically had these two girls like beating the shit out of each other, which was kind of cool. It was like Rumble in the Bronx. And yeah, so they called on the previous model to do the hit. So through most of the movie, you don't know that she's one of these products. So Morgan escapes, and the other prototype sort of hunts her down to kill her. And she brings along this dude who's got a crush on her. Like there's this guy who's like her love interest in the story, but she just kind of uses him and she drags him along. He doesn't know she's not exactly a person. And he goes along with her, and he thinks he's in love, and he totally puts his life in danger. But at some point she's like, stay here, I'll handle this, and she goes to fight Morgan. And the man is left in the car. So in Brave New World, these premature 6-year-old adults from the other camp are socially useless because they lack the mental capacity to perform even the most basic work functions. So they're little kids in their minds, so they can't be trained to run a machine. They're just, they don't have the responsible ethic for it. So anyway, so I'll end the narrative here. But what I'll do is I'll go back and recapitulate some of what I did of the introduction in episode 6. Okay, so in episode 6, I went through Huxley's 1946 foreword to this 1932 novel, Brave New World, but I sort of give a contemporary perspective on it. I bring it into the right now, and given the predictive nature of the novel. So he starts off with a couple of what-ifs about how he could have written the novel differently, as if the success of the novel didn't prove its merits on its own. But of course, a lot of these writers, they like to sound important, going, "Oh, well, it's this is a classic novel, but I could have done it better." Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of in my pajamas, man. I didn't wear my suit and tie. He considered writing a different ending for the book and a more hopeful outlook for the future, but let's face it, the future sucks. So why bother? Like, leave good enough alone, right? He states that the point of the story is to illustrate how biology and psychology affect the individual characters of the story, and hence the lack of focus on the technology itself, as opposed to other books of the genre. So usually in science fiction, you've got like an Asimov, and he'll have this, gadget or whatever, and he'll go into specific detail about how it works. And so there's very little of that in Brave New World. It's more about the person in the story and how the people are affected. He talks a bit about the final revolution which needs to take place in order to bring about this desired utopia. So, we can't go from here to there. I mean, and right now we can see in our culture a push towards transhumanism. I believe that the transgender agenda points towards transhumanism. Yeah, so he talks a bit about the final revolution which needs to take place in order to bring about this desired utopia. And so, yeah, that was where I was at. I was talking about how, we have a transhuman agenda that's going on right now, and that takes several forms. One of them is the transgender thing, which I think aims towards transhumanism. Then there is the idea that we need these ESGs or whatever, these what is it, environmental sustainability goals or whatever, that are the top priority for all these corporations that preclude like people. Like, we don't care what our customers think. Certain industries are aiming towards like just doing away with energy production, like, whether we need it or not, we need to save the planet. So fuck the people, basically. So that right there is part of the transhumanist agenda. There is the whole idea of AI and how we're going to try to sort of find a way that we can merge with these machines or work in cooperation with them at first, but then there's the idea of the metaverse and the idea that you can live virtually in this virtual world and have virtual currency and just, basically stay in your coon pod and eat junk food all day, and you'll be alone and you'll eat bugs, and you're going to desire to live in this virtual world. And so for the elites, they're trying to extend their lifetime, and only the elites are going to have access to anything like that, because they're not going to give that to hoi polloi. They're going to use that for themselves to improve their own world while they dispense with us. And so we're going to basically eat shit in our coon pods and live in the metaverse, and then at some point, we'll either elect to suicide or we will be coerced into it in some way. And I think that part of it is this promise that you can upload your consciousness into the metaverse, and or you can develop an AI version of yourself where they take your voice and all your data, create a virtual you, and then snuff you out. And so these are different ways that we can see this going in our own, just where we're at right now. In the next 10 years, a lot of that can be a reality. And so the whole idea that they're, like the postmodernists, like, what is it? Jordan, I almost called him Jordan Peterson. Well, the postmodernists, with his Kermit the Frog voice. But postmodernism, the whole idea of it is that you've got this this idea that there is no reality, that there is only what goes on inside your mind, this sort of solipsism, that everything's relative. Like, I could be, a woman because I'm a woman in my mind, so that just ignore this crude matter. It's all about, what I've got going on up here. And so what I've got going on up here is more important than everything that's out there, and everything that's out there needs to be crafted to accommodate what I've got going on in here, whether that's in you or whether that's in the world or in society. That somehow I need to be shielded and protected from that violence, which is at odds with my subjective interpretation, right? So I'm trying to think of, I start racking my brain. I swear I've got brain fog, probably from the stabby. I took the stabby, and ever since then, I've had certain issues, let's say. But I guess I'm not allowed to talk about those issues. I get in trouble. I'll get a paddle from one of those nerds in Silicon Valley. So he uses the Marquis de Sade as an example of an archetypal revolutionary figure who disregards the humanity of individuals, and how a switch can be brought about towards the collective, whereby humans can be brought into the service of the state, and even their bodies don't belong to them. And the ultimate expression of this is the sort of collectivization of sexuality, where our main goal is the fulfillment of pleasure. Where do we see that going on? The main goal is the fulfillment of pleasure. So you've got these basically Skittles activists who say that, like, my sort of hedonistic sexual fulfillment of my fetishes are the most important thing in the world. They're a sacrament to what I have replaced religion with. So humans have a tendency towards religion. It is a function of our biological being. And so if we don't have standard religion, what we end up doing is we have this religiosity that wraps itself around these other things. And more often than not, those things tend to be of a sexual nature. And that's where we get a lot of, the pagan cultures of our history. A lot of it is based on sex. And because that is like the highest elation to them. So, for them to like look on beauty, like for beauty to be this religious thing, like the highest value is beauty. That way you can idolate. You can look upon something beautiful and worship it. Well, in the Bible, God says not to look upon the creation, but to look upon the Creator with adoration. And so when you look upon the created being with adoration, whether you're looking at a sculpture or a dildo or whatever they're into, they're not looking to the Creator. They're looking to the created object, and that is the essence of idolatry. And even their bodies don't belong to them. And the ultimate expression of this is the sort of collectivization of sexuality, where our main goal is the fulfillment of pleasure, and we each submit to one another's desire without regard for procreation. So in this dystopia, it's almost like your duty to submit to somebody else's desire. So if somebody else wants to objectify you, that's their right, not yours to keep from them. If someone wants to sort of, what's the word, like ingratiate themselves, if they want to use you, it's like, come here, I need to beat off real quick, hold still, like you don't have any right to object to it because they're fulfilling their desires. And so it's not that it's like this real super rapey culture, but what it is more like is sexuality is encouraged to the point to where if you meet somebody new and they want to have sex with you, it's just kind of the polite thing to do. Like, you get to know each other in that way. And so, like, if you're, and not only that, but everybody's designed to be pretty decent looking anyway, so like there's really not probably a lot of ugly people. Probably even the stupid people are not too bad looking. And so, I mean, it's all beside the point, right? I mean, we've got our own biology that makes us attracted to people. And so, but I think that there is a social aspect that is pervasive. I mean, it's not natural for teenagers to want to castrate themselves, but here we are. So the ultimate expression is the collectivization of sexuality, where our main goal is the fulfillment of pleasure, and we each submit to one another's desire without regard for procreation. Procreation is completely divorced from the sex act itself. So it's almost like the whole idea that a woman would become pregnant and bear a child and like give birth to a child is ridiculous to these people in this book. Like, this woman says that she, this is my son. I had this, I had a baby and here he is, a full grown, and everybody's laughing about it. They're just, and the laughter is not that it's really that funny. It's that it's ridiculous and it makes people uncomfortable. And so, how people can laugh at a discomfort. Have you ever told like an off-color joke and an inappropriate joke in a certain social situation, and people, like, say if you're in church and you actually accidentally say the F word, and somebody, like some of the ladies, they'll cackle and laugh. Like, I mean, I've never experienced that exactly, but it's the kind of thing. Okay, so procreation is completely divorced from the sex act itself. Even sexual activity between children and PEDO activity is hinted at. In the hospital scene where John the Savage goes to see his mom as she's dying, it's kind of like a hospice situation, and what they do is there's this sort of state nanny that brings these little kids in there, and she brings them in there for the express purpose that they are going to witness a death. They're going to see somebody who's dying, basically. They're like, look at the lady who's dying, and the kids are looking around, they're like, why is she so fat? Because this particular person, she didn't grow up in the Brave New World. She grew up on this reservation type place where they had savages. She was from the Brave New World, but she had been brought in by one of the directors on a vacation to New Mexico, and they went to this reservation, which was sort of this resort for people in this dystopian society, where they would go to this resort and they would look at people like they were in some kind of a zoo. They would be like, look at how they live in filth, and they actually they actually have babies, and they have a tribe, and they have families. I mean, they're kind of made to appear as if they're Indians, but I don't know that they're necessarily Indians. They're just people who live that kind of lifestyle, where they sort of live in a tribe, and so they still exist even in this epoch of time that's in this book, but they're kept remotely. And I think the area might even be sort of fenced off. It's like almost like, have you ever seen those videos of like FEMA camps and like, well, like an Air Force base has like a big sturdy fence that goes around the whole thing. And so it's almost like you've got like a 50 square mile area or 100 square miles, and it's fenced off, but inside is where these savages lived. And so this man had brought a date with him on this excursion to this sort of human petting zoo in New Mexico, and somehow she had forgotten to take her birth control or something, and he got her pregnant, and he left her there, and so she was left there to raise the baby on the reservation with the savages. And so the child grew up, and then when the main character of the story, Bernard, goes on a trip with a date. He goes with Lenina and basically brings John the Savage back with him, back to Brave New World. Now, I don't know exactly why they let him come back with him. I would have thought that they would have some kind of control for that, but I guess that was sort of beside the point. But anyway, so as his mom is dying in the hospital, the little kids come in. They're ushered in to see this dying woman because they want to desensitize the children to the idea of death. That death is part of life, and it's not to be feared, and it's not to be shunned, and you should welcome it when it becomes your turn. because they retire people early. They don't try to keep people alive. They're like, okay, it's their time to die. So they brought the kids in there to view this woman who was on her deathbed. And so John kind of lashes out at the kids because they're staring at his mom. He's like, that's my mother, you know, and they're laughing at that whole idea because nobody has a mother. And they're freaking out, and so he scares the kids. I think he even slugs one of the kids. And so the nurse that's there with the kids, she decides to, she's like, oh, you kids come over here, don't you know, stay away from those people, they're dangerous. And then she decides to get them engaged in a game called Find the Zipper. And so it's kind of implied that that's sort of a PEDO kind of activity. So in general, if you just want to, you know, back to the, you know, the socio-sexual thing, if you just want to have someone, you just sort of take them, you know, like it's more or less consensual between adults, but it's kind of expected of you. Like, it's kind of rude to turn someone down, and we already covered this. There's very little ceremony for the protocol for sex. It has little more significance than a handshake. It's no big deal. It's nothing personal. It's just how we say hello. And it's encouraged that we all get to know each other in this way. And it strengthens the bond of society to be sexual with as many people as possible. Oddly enough, there's no mention of venereal disease, the undoing of traditional moral standards of decency. Just like today, and like today, concern for the environment is the pretext for the diminution of family and the abolition of voluntary procreation. And we see that today, for sure. The idea that people would give birth naturally is totally absurd and laughable, and we've taken it even further. The confusion of gender and transhumanist conditioning and even commitment at as early an age as can be recruited to control the population, as every good Malthusian globalist would advocate. Okay, let me go through that again. The confusion of gender and transhumanist conditioning and even commitment at as early an age as one can be recruited to control the population, as every good Malthusian globalist would advocate. Okay, I'm not talking about the book. That's here. Dissuasion through drugs and hormone treatments from the prospects of family life and proliferation. Just neuter them and sweep them into the corporate industrial machine as early as possible. The aim of the governing elite, the controllers in Brave New World, is stability by keeping the population distracted through drugs and pleasure seeking whenever they're not working, in keeping them happy in their servitude. They would never think about rebelling. The revolution is over. They are dumb and fulfilled. What more could they possibly need? It's a kind of stagnant managerial society where things are busy and active with this sort of high-tech recreation. And the consumerism is based on purchasing all of the accoutrements of leisurely sport. Cheap card games and minimalist entertainment is obsolete. You have to spend to enjoy the latest and the greatest. The movies they watch are a multisensory experience called feelies, where there is no real storyline or plot. It's just a sort of gag reel of explosions and softcore prawn and sensational gibberish. And they are forbidden to read or educate themselves beyond the technical position they occupy within the machine. So Huxley here is merely illustrating his vision of our future in this sort of world of totalitarianism brought about not by force, but by the soft arts of propaganda, pharmacology, social conditioning, mind control. And the slavery will be incentivized, and consumerism will coexist with a kind of austerity via the pleasure principle. People don't seem to own very much, and they live in smaller apartments, but they still consume mass entertainment. I already went through this. I kind of went through it off the cuff, and now I'm reading it off the notes. So, I mean, it's all part of the story. So even Huxley warned that the only route to avoiding this future is to break away into decentralized, self-sustaining cooperative societies where people grow their own food and develop their own sovereign economies. And the development of what we're building now with cryptocurrencies. That's what I was thinking right away when he was talking about that, is like the crypto community is basically building this kind of system. Breaking away from centralized government fiat systems and basically living like the Amish. And this was the third option which Huxley spoke about in his introduction, where he said he wanted to change the ending. But the totalitarian system Huxley warns about does not need to be overt. Dictatorships are economically inefficient, all human rights aside. The managerial state controls a population who loves their servitude. As long as people are kept off balance, divided, and dependent, centralization and government control will increase. The most effective propaganda is persuasion by omission rather than active indoctrination. The censorship of ideas which allow you to put two and two together, like Orwell's 1984, not the movie Class of 1984, from the 80s with fat Michael J. Fox, where the kid like does a bunch of coke and climbs up the flagpole and jumps to his death. Did you ever see that movie? Yeah, and not the Van Halen record. Okay, so but in 1984, deletions are made periodically to the lexicon in order to limit the amount of ideas a person can have. And they're doing that right now. They are changing the dictionaries. Okay? Remember that when some conservative news reporter said something about sexual orientation, and like the liberals flipped out over it, and they actually, like the Oxford Dictionary, or was it, I don't want to get that wrong, Webster's, went and changed the definition of sexual orientation and inserted the word offensive. Okay? It became an offensive term because a right-wing politician said it and they wanted to smear that person. So they changed the dictionary. Okay, certain words go down the memory hole, and active dissidents who still attempt to use them are snitched out by certain sycophants, leading to institutional reprisals by the powers that be. Sound familiar? Much like our impending, I say our impending social credit score, but it just goes right into cancel culture. And if you think it can't happen, think again. The silence about truth is more effective than truth itself. Once the capacity for logic has been removed, logical arguments then fall on deaf ears. Now, dependence on the government dole will also facilitate their control. This is why they are so eager to implement social programs like UBI, racial reparations, student debt forgiveness, universal health care, etc. And right now, with the threat of BRICS currencies gaining ascendance and the petrodollar becoming endangered, governments are more desperate than ever before. And also cryptocurrency. They don't like cryptocurrency. That's why you've got, what's her name? That super Democrat woman, the Bernie Sanders clone, Pocahontas. What's her name? No, Elizabeth Warren. Right? She hates cryptocurrency. She's creating an anti-cryptocurrency army. Is what she's calling it. Okay, anti-cryptocurrency army. Because they don't want you to be independent. Because so the governments are more desperate than ever before, and that's why she's against it. Because the governments are desperate. The unthinkable is finally in the foreseeable future. It is a scramble to determine which monetary system is going to prevail. Existing threats to the dollar, like Bitcoin, pale in comparison to that of something like BRICS. It's like the US dollar shit its pants at the school dance, and now there's extra competition in the room. You know, like freaking Chad just walked in. Yet Bitcoin doesn't depend on the dollar, and it will cash out into any currency with off-ramping capabilities. So we need a personal revolution of mind, body, and spirit. We need not give ourselves over to convenience. We have to stop trading our freedom for the illusion of security. We need to take back ownership of ourselves and not submit to a coercive transhumanist technocracy. Or as Jason Burmis calls it, technopoly. I like how Burmis always overemphasizes anything. Technopoly. Society has been on this track of sacrificing our children to the state overlords in order to not be outed and ostracized. Well, you see all these Hollywood goofballs, you know, like, oh, my kids are trans. The irony of how we so desperately draw attention to ourselves and our compulsions, while at the same time trying to hide within these pockets of conformity and cohesion into the fabric of the hive mind. By the way, you're not going to save the planet. Any idea that you are going to get to live and simultaneously bring yourself into an acceptable participation of this whole CLIMATE charade is nonsense. The whole point is to get you out of the picture. So just take your drugs and shut the fuck up. You don't want to be subversive, do you? Through systematic elimination, all dissent gets weeded out, and eugenics determines homogeneous compliance at every strata. Except, of course, the ruling elite who do whatever the fuck they want. After all, they rigged the game, convincing you all along that you were the problem. And your carbon footprint, you were the disease. Governments, military, big corporations telling you that your own personal output destroyed the earth, while they manufacture plastics and synthetic compounds, dumping waste into the oceans, buzzing around in their private jets, funding wars, developing chemical weapons, manufacturing more BOMBs to drop on underdeveloped countries. There's plenty of land in America. Just move down. Spread out a bit, okay? You think we're overpopulated? Move down. You don't have to pile on top of one another. New York City is a prime example of what should never be done in America. Richard Hart talks about this. He says that, like, wherever you see some big city where people are just like piled on top of one another, that's because they like that. That's what they do that on purpose. Just move down. Just, you know, if you fly over the United States, you see all the unoccupied land. When I was out on tour, we were on tour buses and we'd drive for days and there would be nothing but wilderness for freaking hours upon hours. Move down. Okay? I'm not giving life advice here. Just move down. With the diminution of political and economic freedom, we see an increase in libertinism, which the dictator actually encourages. When they say sexual empowerment, they mean empowerment for them, not for us, while we get degraded. They'll terminate our pleasure once it's time to go to war. Through our own hedonism, we are acclimated to a state of servitude. So it looks like dystopia is right around the corner. As long as we don't nuke ourselves, we'll probably live to see it. Again, the solution is decentralized. Self-education. Libraries exist. You always hear these people, oh, I come from a repressed community. We are denied access to education. No, you're not. Every community has libraries. Go to the fucking library. I know you don't want to. It's like, well, you expect me to go to the library and read? You're like, it's the same people who act like, what, you expect me to abstain from sex? I can't do that. You expect me to read? I'm not going to read. Libraries exist. Go to one while you still can. Use science to your own advantage, okay? Not scientism. Actual science. Learn some science. Don't just point to the guy in the lab coat and say, listen to him. He's an expert. All these experts are fucking frauds, okay? All of them. They're all bought and paid for. So use science to your own advantage and not that of an elite class of slave masters. Because that's what they're bringing back, is slavery. Like, we talk about slavery like it's over, like we're like, oh, it's this regrettable thing in history. No, this is a regrettable thing in the future. Okay, so, and they're bringing you to it. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Hispanic or Asian. It's there. It's coming for all of us. Make no mistake about that. The solution is to engage in the pursuit of a society of sovereign individuals. And this is the crypto lifestyle. This is what the crypto lifestyle leads to. Okay, is the society of sovereign individuals. Unless we choose this route, we will submit to either one of many totalitarian states and suffer annihilation or mass casualties and endless wars, or a one-world totalitarian government and resulting tyranny of a welfare utopia. So either we become a society of sovereign individuals or we submit to totalitarianism. And that's all there is. Unless we choose this route, we will submit to either one of many totalitarian states and suffer annihilation or mass casualties and endless wars, or a one-world totalitarian government and resulting tyranny of a welfare utopia.